Doc Rivers is a coach who, I mean, you can get away with Doc Rivers as your coach like 10 or 15 years ago.
Welcome to episode 29 of the David Binkowski podcast. My guest today, SportsGrid CTO, NBA expert, Arturo Galletti. Arturo, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, nice to be here, David.
It's been a while, but we are in the thick of the playoffs. The first round, we got series endings, almost series ending, and stuff. We'll see what happens. So there's injuries everywhere. So I thought it would be fun if we dove in first by talking about the series that is over, and that is the Miami Heat and the Atlanta Hawks, where the Miami Heat essentially roughed up Trae Young and smothered him to the point that he played like the worst he's ever played in his career.
Somebody was, I think it was John Hollinger was saying that, like, every year we talk ourselves into these 8 or 7 seeds, and like, really, no, the Hawks weren't even an 8th seed. I mean, like, it's just they got in because the Cavs got hurt, right? Yep. And the Cavs got hurt, and they couldn't kind of cash in the it is annoying because we lost the futures bet on them making the playoffs, and like on Evan Mobley, I'm still kind of like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
But it really was because the Cavs got hurt down the stretch and they just couldn't win enough games. And then like the Hawks sneaked in, but really like the problem for the Hawks was like any team that they were going to run into in round one was going to absolutely wreck them. Like beat them within an inch of their lives, basically. Because the teams that, like, if you look at the top 5 teams in the East, the top 5 teams in the East all have defensive personnel to absolutely give the Hawks nightmares, right? Yep. If you get a little further down, then you can actually find somebody, but like, you know, the Heat just have a smothering defense that can basically eat up all their the little guards. And then, you know, I had the Heat like 18 points better. like something like 15 points better on neutral court. Somebody was giving me shit about it. And like, you know, if you look at the outcomes of the series, I think the Hawks ended up winning. Sorry, the Heat ended up winning by an average for like 15 points in the series. Yeah. Like there's, you know, when I do these models, you kind of look and like it says the average would be about 15. You're like, yeah, and then you look at the past series. Were you wrong? It's like, no, we were wrong on the series. I mean, Capella got hurt, but then like, you know, Butler and Lowry got hurt. I mean, I think some of it is I think Spoelstra kind of knows what the series was, so he wasn't going to push Lowry or Butler. And I think like the last game was like, just you don't need to play. Don't worry. Yep. Game 5 was like, we got this. Don't worry.
Yeah, it was the Mortal Kombat finish him. When it comes to I you know, and Miami's defense was great. Obviously holding teams under 100 points and is no small feat in the NBA. But the first game, I follow some Hawks writers, and they're putting together threads of the Heat just knocking Trae right on his ass. You know, just being super physical with him, like almost bad boys Jordan rules. And I mean, it was just valid, but the refs let it go. So adjust. What are you gonna do?
That was the case the entire season. And here's the thing. That's the way the playoffs goes. This is the argument, and we'll talk a little bit when we mention the Mars. Like there's players who just, you know, when the playoffs come, they're going to get knocked on their ass, and that's gonna that's gonna affect their game.
Yep.
And again, this isn't like this isn't right. This isn't something new. It's just also they don't, you know, they allow more physical contact sometimes in the games, and it depends on the crews. Some crews will allow a ton more physical contact. Actually, like while I was talking to you, I was gonna check something real quick about that series, which is I think there's a common factor in some of these series that happens. It's like Miami might have just lost the Scott Foster game, but before I accuse, I want to make sure that like, I want to make sure that
it goes back to for people. If you've listened to this podcast before, and this has been a point of discussion, your refereeing matters. The refereeing matchups absolutely 100% matter. And look, defense wins championships. Like, so the teams that have done well historically on defense have always pretty much done well in the playoffs because they kind of swallow the whistle. And the rules this year, getting rid of the flopping, they're still like getting flopped, but getting rid of soft contact, that's what kind of what they trained them for all season.
Some of that came back later part of the season. Supposedly like the players complaining about like making their bonuses and that kind of thing. But in the playoffs, and you can see this in the games, there are games where like there's not going to be contact called. And like I tell this is some of this is subtle, but some of you paying attention is like it's the like players will test what they can get away with.
Well, this is exactly
the referee like if a referee isn't allowing defensive contact on one end and he is allowing defensive contact on the other, which I mean like the handshake, look for handshakes. Like if you're able to get onto the player and basically like bump him, either bump him with the body or bump him with the hand, then that's an advantage. If you can do that on defense and the other team can't do that on defense because they get a ticky-tack foul, then that like happens. And this isn't something that's going to necessarily show up in the box score. Like it's not necessarily going to be like, 20 free throw defense. Sometimes it is, but like a smart defensive team that's in the playoff, if they're getting called for ticky-tack fouls on like, any hand press or coming up on physical contact, will back the hell up, right?
Well, and the example we've used on the podcast that you brought up multiple times is Kawhi Leonard.
Kawhi Leonard is an expert on both ends, right? Like you watch him, and if he can basically. He is freakishly strong, so he can literally like grab people with like one hand and literally move them like off feet. So if he's allowed to push off with his offhand, the hand he's not dribbling with, games when he does that is when you see that you're like just grab the live over on him on anything you can because he is just gonna he's just gonna kill people.
Exactly.
Because he just can just lift and move and you can't actually physically stop him. Now, you'll see him. He'll see it. If he gets the whistle when he's pressing off, or the same thing on defense, if he starts getting the whistle, he'll back off. Yep. Toronto's a good team to look at that. Phoenix is a good team to look at that. Boston's like that too. Miami. Yeah. Like we're like if they will come out and they will try to be as physical as possible early in the game, right? And Draymond's some of the Warriors.
Yep.
And if there's a certain level of physicality allowed, then they start breaking out the chairs. The chairs are allowed, they start breaking out the chainsaws. They will go as far as the referees let them, right? Teams will do that.
That was a tweet that I blasted out when Boston and Miami were both playing, I think consecutive nights, and they're both playing very physical. And I was like, can't wait to watch someone get decapitated in the Celtics Heat Eastern Conference Finals, because literally, like you said, they'll let them get away with as much as they get away with. Speaking of the Celtics, go ahead.
My biggest complaint with Celtics has been, and I think we'll talk a little bit about that. Like, let's move on to the second series that's finished. It's the Celtics and Nets. Is I think my biggest historical complaint with this Celtics team had been under Brad Stevens, that like when you got into the nuts and bolts of it, like the conference finals, he would get out coached by the other coach in some of the finer details, particularly physicality of play, because he would back off rather than challenge the refs. And then this is an ongoing argument. Like, why is this ref complaining about like fouls and whatnot? I'm like, dude, because this is what you do. If you I've been watching basketball forever, and like you look, Pat Riley and like Phil Jackson would always bitch about the refs because they're not necessarily playing for the particular game. They're trying to get better calls in the next game. So they're looking to see if they can get their guys to get to the foul line. And they want to see if they can get like an advantage on the defensive end from getting more physicality allowed. So they're basically kind of prepping the ground. And Brad would never do that. Brad would like, it's like, And he would never like, you get in these series with like Nick Nurse or like Spoelstra or like Ty Lue, and you're like, God damn it. Like these guys are going to like milk every single freaking advantage that they have. You have to kind of press to to stay on that. And I kind of like respect that. Like the big difference I thought, and I was telling this to like my impression from the Celtics in the series was like, I think obviously they're more talented. All the young players have gotten more talented. These guys have been like multiple conference finals, right?
Yep.
But there was a real difference in the series. And a friend of mine who was betting on the series, like I was talking like, look, I think he was saying he was going to bet the Nets. I'm like, don't do that. No, Simmons is going to play. It's like, Simmons is not going to play. No. I knew the whole Simmons thing is he's suing the Sixers. This was all a thing where like his agent was leaking shit and he was never going to play. Right.
Yep.
Really kind of dumb. He's just never going to play. And once I referred to him, he's like, oh, no shit, you're right. He was like relating the same clips as I was like, oh shit, let me back off from the bet. But the other thing to say, like, look, the thing in the series is like he didn't think that Jason Tatum was going to be able to. He was like, well, if Jason Tatum can like just kind of match KD, they can win, but it's not going to be fun. I'm like, that's not what happened. This was really kind of a Jason Tatum, I'm a superstar series. He was the best player in the series. He was better than KD and he was better than Kyrie. And like at points, he was better than both combined. It was really kind of impressive. The other thing, as I said, like different from a Brad Stevens team, this team did not fold like these Celtics teams have in like tight games or late in the fourth. So they did get a little bit of the gyps, but like Udoka did a really good job of like changing up things. When that would happen, when the Celtics would get cold on offense, he changed something. He'd move something around. He put PP in there, Pritchard. He put Grant Williams in there. He moved some things around. And like PP, and for example, like one of the things he did in one of the games, he just went small, and because they were basically collapsing on Tatum, he went to like Pritchard, and Pritchard would be like cutting left and right, and there was nobody, like the Nets didn't have defensive personnel to cover him, right? Yep. And it wasn't really on like Pritchard. It was just really they once if you have Kyrie on the floor, yep, you're going to be short on defensive personnel, and they're breaking, like when they broke the glass and put in Blake Griffin playing in like a month, and poor Blake Griffin. I mean, kudos to him. Blake Griffin tried. He just didn't have the legs for it. It was kind of like. Well,
they even made a comment. They said like he's not going to block your shot at the rim anymore, but he will take that charge. Well, that's called dead legs. He has no legs anymore. That's what that is. Like. I take charges in old man basketball and here in Puerto Rico. Like, trust me, I get it. His legs are shot. If you get a chance, by the way, go to the NBA on TNT's Twitter and go check out the Brooklyn bus that's going off to Cancun.
The Brooklyn bus, the bus.
Freaking hilarious. Check it out. The next series. Well, let's go to the next series because we got a bunch to get through.
I think the one point on that particular series is as much as people were overrating the Nets, but I think that like it's not hard. You have to understand like the Celtics were really freaking good.
Yep.
And the question mark I had in that series was like, they weren't going to have Rob Williams, and how were they going to handle that? And if you look at that series, the way they handled that was Grant Williams and like Peyton Pritchard played really well. Particularly Grant Williams is now a really good defender who can do stuff on deep. He wasn't this 2 years ago. He wasn't this last year. But in that series, he was covering KD straight up, and that's a huge deal because that means they can basically rotate elite defenders on if you and any team has like 2 or 3 elite offensive players, the Celtics have enough to like basically swamp one and basically cover the other one with like an elite defensive player, which is a huge deal going forward. If we go to the next series, you want to go to the more interesting one, or you want to go to the one that's basically over?
It's over. It's the Milwaukee's going to.
Yeah, Milwaukee's playing with its food. Chicago, basically, they're missing probably the best player in Lonzo Ball, maybe the second player. Well, Caruso now has a concussion. Zach LaVine is in COVID protocol. This series is freaking over.
Yeah.
Now,
10-point spread up to 12 minutes after the line came out.
I have it. I have it's game 5, right? So they're playing in Milwaukee. So I have Milwaukee favored by 18 points at home, even without Chris Middleton, which is the more interesting.
Yep.
Now, the second series is going to be Boston, Milwaukee. In that, I have Boston favored. I have Boston favored to win in 5 because Milwaukee is going to be missing Chris Middleton. Yeah, Milwaukee hasn't been that good. Like Milwaukee hasn't been that good against good teams this season. They've never really managed to turn it on. Giannis has been Giannis, but there's a lot of pieces in that team that just haven't the hangover from like last year. They just haven't gotten there.
Yep.
And again, the same problem that like the Nets have, the Bucks are going to have like even more because like they'll have the personnel on that. Not having Middleton actually makes a huge difference because Middleton's actually been a piece that's like been really good against the Celtics because he's like the tall guy who like he's the guy who's been the problem for the C's because he's collapsed on one and then do the other. I think the C's have enough defensive personnel to make the series kind of short. It's an interesting thing to see because I think Giannis is going to win in one game. Yep. Tony Brothers and Scott Foster might win them another. But I mean, I think that's a 5-6 game series, but the Celtics should win, right? That's it.
Right.
The next one is the more interesting series,
yep,
which is the Philly Toronto, right?
Yep.
So Philadelphia is lucky as shit in the series because 1, Scotty Barnes got hurt early in the series. And 2, they won. The Raptors just missed some free throws and lost that overtime. If not, they would be down 3-2, or maybe the series would be over.
Yep.
This is not the first series we're going to say that. And nobody, I think, I believe it is 10 series in a row where Doc Rivers has had a lead and lost.
Yep.
He's up to 10 series in his it's 10 series in his career as a coach where he's had a lead and he's lost. And this would be 10, right? Right now, the Sixers are not favored by my model in any of the remaining games in the series. But they are favored to win the series because they get 2 shots at. Right? So they're not favored in Toronto. They're not favored in Philadelphia.
We have to figure going back home, if they do make it, if it goes to a game 7, it's always
if it goes to game 7, that Philly crowd will be one of the worst crowds for a home team. Because Philly fans will turn on a team, right?
Yeah.
And that it's just Doc Rivers teams like always have these like terrible vibes. Like Doc teams, they're just bad vibe city. And again, I mean, I think part of the problem, and I think I said it before the series, my big bet, one of my big bets before the playoff, the first one, I was like, just grab the Raptors, because I thought like if Scotty Barnes doesn't get hurt, we would have been sitting here with like the Raptors up 3-2 at some point.
Yeah,
right. Or the Raptors would either been up 2-1 or 3-2, and you would have had a plus money bet because the same thing's happening now, which is like Embiid always gets hurt or Harden gets hurt, right? And right now Embiid has like a dislocated finger, so he can't really shoot. So they're playing a physical team in Toronto, which is why I thought like either Harden or Embiid would get hurt. And the other problem is like Harden just can't the joke is like he can't take off that stripper weight now that he's over 30 that quickly. He just can't. Like he used to get himself back into shape by like playing, but like you get older, you can't really do that. He's not that guy. I mean, he is, but he isn't. So in a series against a physical defensive team like Toronto, it becomes a real problem. Now, I kind of think, my take is that, whoever wins game 6 is winning the series. I kind of think Toronto's series. Yeah. And again, just because, if you're saying, if Philly's healthy, but I don't think Philly's physical condition is going to get better across the series.
No.
Doc Rivers doesn't make adjustments in series. Nick Nurse does. So, whatever Nick Nurse has figured out in the series, which, Toronto's always going to get stronger in the series as the series goes, because their coach is going to make adjustments to make Philly's life impossible. And Doc Rivers famously just does not make adjustments. So you add that in, you add physical decay, and, I think they lose game 6 and they get into game 7, and that crowd gets tight as hell. And if Toronto goes on to run that game could be freaking over. Now, again, I'm not saying Philly can't win, but even if Philly, and I think my thing is, even if Philly does win in the series, then going into Miami series, they're going to have problems. Right? Because
exactly
everything that applies to the Toronto series applies to the Heat series. And Spoelstra's going to be sitting at home watching film of this, and whatever Nurse has figured out, Spo's going to basically hit Philadelphia with in game 1, Spo and Udoka in game 1 in the series.
Yep. Right.
So just Doc has a very particular kind of Doc Rivers is a coach who, you can get away with Doc Rivers as your coach 10 or 15 years ago, but now every the competence level of opposing coaches in the playoffs is such that Doc is really hard, because as I said, Spo's just going to sit there. He's going to watch whatever the hell Nurse is doing, and he has the personnel to execute it. And same thing with Celtics. The Celtics are going to sit there, watch the film on it, and they will be doing the exact same shit that works against Philly in round 1, in round 2, in round 3 if they got there. And Doc won't make fast enough adjustments, right?
Yep.
If you're going to have Doc as your coach, and Doc is actually good at managing. Doc is a good systems coach. All the Spurs branch coaches are. Doc is one of the original Spurs pop coaches, but he's actually really good at managing the press. Kerr has very similar things to Pop, but Kerr's actually better at the short-term strategy stuff, and Kerr always builds a really good staff around. Yep. Doc does, but in this particular case, he doesn't have a bench system like he used to in the Clippers when he had Ty Lue, right? So, yep. So it's a bit of, and Ty Lue can make adjustments, but Doc is you can see it. It's his edge kind of wears away as the series goes on.
And the reality is with Philly that Tyrese Maxey had that monster game, and then Embiid had great games, but if Maxey's not doing the monster game thing, if Harden's just being good and Embiid's hurt,
I think Max can't play in Toronto either.
Yeah. So I mean, that's just not. They're not going to have enough guns to go at. Let's hop over to the West, where we have
only one man can stop the Suns.
Yep. We'll do this. We'll start with the Suns because
only one man can stop the Suns. I believe we are now. I believe Chris Paul has never won a game ref by Scott Foster, and I did the analysis. It's like 14, ref by Scott Foster in the playoffs. Scott Foster is worth 11 points on the line in a versus CP3 team, which, if you're listening, that is complete insanity. What that means is like I expect the Suns to win unless Scott Foster is reffing a game, and Scott Foster has only reffed 2 games. He's already reffed 1 game in the series, which they lost. I believe the error was like 12 or 13 points on the line in that game. And Scott Foster has only reffed 1 CP3 series, 2 games in 1 CP3 series, which is the 2018 Western Conference Final, where he reffed Game 1 and Game 7, which Houston lost at home. And this is why I say, like, both James Harden and CP3 both probably have a ring, except for Scott Foster. But in this particular series, I mean, like, Phoenix, they don't have Booker, and they'll probably have him for the second round, like at least later in the second round.
Yep.
But in the first, so last night they won. They should be favored. They're going like Game 6 is in New Orleans, and they should be favored in New Orleans. Like I got them about 5 points. Again, 5 points. So is Scott Foster? I don't think is going to ref Game 6, right? The league's might do it, which would be kind of insane, but like I would expect if Scott Foster's doing a ref a game, it's going to be Game 7. So,
right.
So I think the Pelicans have to get to Game 7 to get the favorable referee in games, and like they have to get to Game 7 to get it.
I love the series just because of the Pelicans rookies giving CP3 a taste of
it. Oh, you like? I love he's it. Great. The Puerto Rican guy is great. He's
Alvarado.
Alvarado is great.
Yeah.
No, I mean, here's the thing. The Pelicans actually have the Pelicans aren't better than the record. They're a better team than the record. The Suns are really, really freaking good. It's just like, the Suns in any series, and I figured this out, and somehow I need to incorporate this model. In any series, a CP3 team starts down 1-0, 1-0-1. They always start down 0-1 because there's always going to be a game in that series that's going to be ref by Scott Foster, and they're not winning, right?
Yep.
They're really not. I mean, it's 11 points. Like, you know what the only game a CP3 team has won in the last decade in the playoffs against like Scott Foster?
No.
The Valley-Oop.
Oh, right.
You know that one game where they were like down 1, and they threw this like miracle pass.
One of the more twins. Yeah.
Yeah, the stunt play threw it out for like I think it was Booker who threw it in for an alley-oop, and they won it on and Foster reviewed it to try to stop it. There was just no way. He was like, no, that's legal. I gotta let it go. And and so they won that game with a miracle play by 1 point. Is the only win by a CP3 team in the last decade in the playoffs.
That's what it takes. That's what it takes.
Yes.
Let's look at
and Foster. And again, I'll give the example. If you guys anybody watch Game 5, Scott Foster gave a master class in how to within the rules put his foot on the scale for the Nets. Right.
Yep.
If you watch that game, he ticky-tack fouled Tatum out, and he was just calling ticky-tack fouls left and right on the Celtics, which put the Nets in the penalty, which tightened and like then he was just allowing contact on the Celtics on the other side. So that's kind of like, and the Celtics basically beat it, right? But they barely beat it, right? They were the better team, but then like that fourth quarter, like, Foster put his foot on the penalty. He was trying, the league likes getting extra games of series that are breaking like ratings records, right? And then this is home field advantage 101, and Scott Foster gave a home field advantage like tutorial in that series. Like it's not the worst he's ever done, but it was a really clear where you're watching, we're like, God damn it, man, what are you doing? But yeah, that's enough on the Sun series. I think like the more interesting one is the drunkest series in the playoff, which is Memphis Grizzlies and Minnesota Timberwolves. And I said this last night, the Minnesota Timberwolves have been the better team 4 of the 5 games and also the dumber team 4 of the 5.
Yeah.
And again, they're really young. So the encapsulation of that series is that if you look at that last play where Ja, like the Ja layup. So Anthony Edwards decides he's going to steal the ball off the inbound, right? And so he basically comes from behind, but he by coming from behind, he doesn't count on the fact that Ja's so fast that when he gets the ball, he can't get around him. So the mistake was, the smart play was either you get in front of him, the ball deny him so they can't pass it to Ja. And Anthony Edwards is fast enough to stay in front of Ja, especially with somebody he had a drop back defender behind him. So there are two guys assigned to Ja, but basically what Anthony Edwards is like going behind is that like the guy behind him was too far back. So he either Anthony Edwards either need to be a step back from Ja to basically force him into a bad long range shot, or he needed to be in front of him to just not get the ball to him so they break up the play and they pass somebody else. But no, let me go behind him and count on this guy who's preternaturally fast, who's Ja, on not getting the ball. Like once Ja got the ball going towards the basket, I was like, oh.
It's over, yeah.
Like, and the guy behind him can't do shit because the guy behind him is specifically there as the help defender, not as the primary defender. So he's off 5 steps. Like, I was like looking and going like, what are you doing? Like I was watching that game and going like, oh God, Timberwolves out. I was like, the Timberwolves are just in control. They really could. This series really could be over to the Timberwolves. And I picked them before the series, and it's one of those where like I look at them all and go like, you were right, but like this team is just like they're just a young stupid team and they do young stupid things. I fully expect the Timberwolves to win. Like it was the joke that like the Timberwolves win, like Timberwolves win when somebody like runs onto the court, tries to glue themselves onto the court. Like playoff win, and I fully expect that to happen in game. Like they'll win game 6. We'll get a game 7, which will be crazy and wild. And either of these teams will like Memphis. To Memphis' credit, this is a really bad matchup. But Memphis' coaches have like done a shit ton to try to get themselves to the best personnel in the series. They haven't been playing Adams. They've been playing Brandon Clark a lot. Brandon Clark was huge in that game. They don't win that game without Brandon Clark. And they figured out like the Memphis staff, to their credit, has figured out a way to like put themselves in spots when the Timberwolves fuck up, they can come back from these 20 points down or 15 points out to win, right? You gotta give credit for that. So like they've shown a lot of like fire and gumption. I think like it'll come for Timberwolves. I mean Anthony Edwards is really fucking good.
Oh, he's amazing. He's amazing.
But he's still in this headspace where like his brain thinks he's actually like better than like as good as he is. So he makes some dumb mistakes. Yep. But like, I mean, I'm just watching that game. That's a game. I'm like, oh, they're gonna fucking lose, and I'm like, I'm literally just laughing because I'm like, this was like my big round one like pick and bet was like the Timberwolves or the Grizzlies, and I can't question. I'm like, what I've seen in this series is like, yes, I was correct in picking the Timberwolves. In terms of like if we play this series like 10 times, the Timberwolves, they're at worst 3-2 up going back home. I think.
Right.
But this is like, they wound up at like they're 2-3 down. And if you watch the series, you're like, yeah, okay. Golden State and the Nuggets. Golden
State Nuggets, yeah. You think it's wrapping up?
I think there's a good I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the Nuggets pull this one out. We're playing so it's game 5 in Golden State. I think Golden State wants to close it out, but like I think Denver, they've got Jokic, so there's always a chance they can win. The problem for Denver has always been that like they only really have Jokic, right? So they have Jokic and they have Highland. And Highland is stuff. I like Highland. I loved Highland in the draft. He's actually gotten really good as the season gone along, but he's still a rookie, right?
Right.
So, and the Warriors have enough personnel to kind of knock him down and take him out of this game. And while I think he's a guy who can actually get around that first time is really freaking hard. Like he's had some good games. Like the game they won is because Highland like went off. But it's a little too much fast for the rookie. So I do think that I think Golden State lightly closes out, but again, I wouldn't be surprised if this goes 6, right? I wouldn't, or 6 or 7. Like because again, I think that I think the Warriors definitely win this series. I think that like the Nuggets have actually like I think the Warriors kind of exceeded my expectations in the series. But again, I think there are good reasons for that.
Well, the lineup that they put out there, I'm not sure. I'm not really much of a fan of the nickname, but the PTSD lineup is insane. Like.
Well, I mean, it's because like Denver just doesn't have the personnel for it. I mean, It works now, but like that's going to be an interesting lineup when you're playing like Memphis or Phoenix, which Memphis or Phoenix can both like throw some both elite defensive teams that can basically go like okay, like they can handle Poole. They can throw some personnel at Poole and actually make it more interesting. But I mean, again, and I think Denver, I think is actually exceeding expectations. If they had Porter Jr. and Murray, but they don't have Porter Jr. and Murray, so it's really hard. Unless Jokic completely goes off the scale. And Jokic has had a great series, but Jokic basically needs to be a monster for this team to succeed. And I think the Warriors have enough personnel to prevent that for
Right.
the most part. Because like when you can basically ball deny someone because he can't pass away, because
Yep.
last
one.
And Dallas against the unserious Utah Jazz. I mean, what to say about the series? I think the thing about this, so Dallas is the better team. Dallas with Luka is the better team. Dallas should win this series. Utah had an opportunity to win early. They did, and this line I use with this Utah team is, they're the whole thing was, oh, Rudy, they're complaining like they weren't passing the ball and like, oh, because they pass the ball, it doesn't work. Okay, so I actually went out and watched film for Rudy Gobert playing for France. And you know what France does for Rudy Gobert?
Have actual wing defenders?
No. On offense. On offense.
Sorry.
Like, what does Rudy Gobert run when he's with France? They basically run single step to the basket stuff. So he's either getting the ball for a pivot turn in the post, right? Yep. He's the trailer or he's the trailer or the wing, or like on a cut. He's the trailer on a cut, or he's getting the ball one dribble towards the basket from the free throw line. So he's getting it at the shoulder and he's dribbling towards the line. What they never do is they never put him in a spot where he has to like dribble the ball and back down.
Right.
Like Rudy is really good if Rudy's moving towards the basket, or like if he's got the ball in front of him moving towards the basket, or he's not bringing the ball down because he's doing a twist, Rudy is fantastic. But what Utah is doing is Utah will pass it to him like deep in the hole on the post and expect him to dribble down backwards and try to work it towards the bucket, and he gets stripped from behind because he's actually really not, like if he has to like pay attention, he can't handle like looking at the basket behind and like not looking at the ball, right? As he's dribbling, right? It's bad action. And if you look at it, like how France is doing, like France is putting him like, if you put him at the line and he's just doing one dribble and 3 steps, he's like 7 feet. He's amazing because he can do one dribble and literally just like
use his legs. Use the legs.
If you want to see how that works in the NBA, look at what Giannis does. This is what Giannis does. Giannis does the thing where like he does one dribble and then takes 5 steps from like 2 feet before the 3-point line, the free throw line, and he gets to the hoop. So Rudy does the same thing for France, right? Because they're not putting him in a position where they're not putting him in a position that he's not comfortable. He's fine moving north and south. He's really good moving north and south, and he's fine with the ball in front of him. And he's great when he doesn't have to bring the ball down, right?
Yep.
Like do that. Don't do this shit you're doing. Where like one, they're either not passing to him, or they're putting him in a position where like they're posting him up and trying to get him to back down, which is like 1980s odds. Like, what are you doing? Like I'm looking at like the Utah Jazz. I'm like what is this stupid offense? Again, I think this is the last gasp of this Utah era. Exactly. I think like they've got Danny Ainge in there. I think Danny's gonna trade everybody. I think Danny's just gonna basically like fire sale, get some picks, and start rebuild. And here's the thing: like Danny Ainge deserves his flowers because if you look at the Celtics, those are all like up and down that Celtics roster. Those are all Danny picks, right?
Yep.
Like the only guy who isn't really a Danny pick is you got Derek White, who they traded for, Brad Stevens trade, and Al Horford, who's a guy who Danny went and got, and they went and got him back. We love Al Horford. But everybody else, like, Grant Williams, pick. Robert Williams, pick. Jaylen Brown, pick. Marcus Smart, pick. Jason Tatum, pick. Peyton Pritchard, pick. They're all Danny Ainge guys that he went out and got in the draft. And he did that by going out, making trades, getting extra draft picks, and going out and doing that. And I think, now in Utah and doing that, that's what he's going to do. And we're going to, like, I always say, like, you complain about Rudy now. Rudy's going to wind up on a team that's going to take a look at him and go, like, we're just going to run the France place. Right. And they're going to do that. And you're like, but how? It's like simple. You like these teams like do these, like, I really kind of get annoyed when there is film. When there's film about how to use a player effectively, and you refuse to do the film, then the coach is not good.
Right.
And you can tell me whatever you want, but like if I can go out and find film of a player being used effectively, like, I mean, if I'm Utah, I would have gone out and got, like, you watch these France, like, just go out and get Nick Batum. Whatever you need to just get him.
Yeah.
Nick Batum playing with Rudy, like Nick Batum knows exactly how to set up the big man. So he's getting like easy dunks. He's getting like run through the hoop, and he's just getting all these like high value shots off, right? Now, these are not 15 shots a game, but these might be like 8 shots a game that are like, 80% going into the bucket, right? And they put you in a bad position because you have to kind of like, if Gobert could basically go from the free throw line to you have to cover that, right? And it opens a lot of things up there. But like I watch these Utah games and I get frustrated because like I'm like it is the stupidest team. And then there'll be the game where like they take themselves out, which will happen at some point. And again, Jason Kidd is not a great coach. He's gotten a little bit better this year. He's better than he was.
That's one thing I want to make sure we did was make sure we recognize that he as far as expectations go, I think he's exceeded both of our expectations because I didn't see. Well, I mean, we were clowning on the player council, and we're and it's passed and all that stuff, and then he comes out, and then Dallas plays great down the stretch, and they are.
I want to see him against an actual real coach, an actual real team. So like, and yeah, I'm sorry, Utah, but really, no, you're not a real. Utah is unserious. If Utah was
serious as their nickname, it's the serious as the nickname.
Yes, I call them Muzaks. The Muzaks are serious. They would have won this series because they had every advantage to do that, and they just like if you look at it, like they look at their log, what they're doing stupid things, and just they're not going to do that. And again, I want to see them against Phoenix. I mean, Luka is an outstanding talent. I do want to see what happens when like they get slammed down with an actual defense and start making. But I mean, like Luka's been freaking great in these games, so that's actually going to be really interesting. Particularly since I don't know that Booker is going to be available until like maybe 3 or 4 games series.
Right,
it's going to make it kind of an interesting series. So I mean, like the way I kind of see this going is I see it as we're I think Phoenix still survives. Depending on when Booker's back, I think Phoenix Golden State is what's gonna end up happening in the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah.
And I think it's gonna like if Phoenix is 100%, see Scott Foster.
Having a hard time. Yeah, I was gonna say having a hard time committing to that one.
I would say that what's gonna happen is that I think the Warriors might get there just because I think it's really hard to overcome a 1. Like if functionally, like the Suns have to win 4 of 6, right? And winning 4 of 6 against the Warrior teams are out and playing well. It's got to be hard, particularly if the Suns are. And this doesn't mean This doesn't mean I think the Warriors are a better team than the Suns. The Suns are good, but the problem is again they're gonna be down a game at the start of any series, and I think they can basically overcome that against Dallas, right? If Booker is back early enough, but if they're limited in any way in that series, and Scott Foster is going to cost them like game 1 or game, Scott Foster will cost them 1 court, and then the Warriors will get through. And then like I think if I was going to guess, it's going to be the Celtics kind of face there.
Yep.
And then the Celtics have been the best team of the second of 2022, and really they're playing really really well right now.
Yep.
And again, it's down to the fact that now they have elite defenders all the way to like 7, right? So they can, when Daniel Theis is basically a guy who could be like he's a luxury. Like, sometimes we put him out there in terms of defense. It's just really like I love the fact that they got him basically for a ham sandwich. Like, give us the guy who was our like rim protector during our last conference finals, like 2 years ago, for nothing.
Yeah.
For the right to cut what's his name? I blanked him out. The freedom can.
And it's freedom, yeah.
Yes, for the right to be free of freedom. Yes. And I think the Heat are good, and I think the Heat are the team that will be facing the Celtics. My thing with the Heat is the same thing that I was basically mentioning about the Sixers is I don't trust the Heat to stay healthy in that series.
Right.
We've already kind of seen that. Butler and Lowry, and again, I think some of it is the Heat are kind of like making sure they baby him so they're healthy. But I do think there's good probability that same thing that happened during the Mickey Mouse run, which is like the Heat eventually got hurt because like, and even in that environment where they weren't traveling, like the Heat eventually got banged up.
Yep. I'm tired. They're tired.
No, I think the style they play too, and I think that's like they have to rely more on their top. That the Celtics do have the advantage also of because they're so deep defensively. They were late. If you watch that game early against the Nets, they were fucking around like in the second quarter. Like they were running in the second quarter, they were running stuff for Rob to try to get him to like get involved, like throwing up these alley-oop plays which weren't working. But they were literally
just messing around. Yeah,
they're just messing around, and they tightened down at the end. But I think some of that is because they have that deeper roster, and they were injured early, and now they're healthy, right? Which I think some of that is the same thing. Like there's a lot of teams that are getting hurt now. right? Particularly ones that went on that Olympic run, right? And so like to play those long terms, like a lot of those guys are out, right? They like were like banged up. And I think at the end of the day, I think both the Warriors and the Seas are the ones that are looking the healthiest and deepest. And I do think that's going to make a difference.
Absolutely. I think the last point about this before we wrap up, they also made an addition by subtraction, which is they shipped Dennis Schroeder the hell out of there. So
yeah, Schroeder and they basically like Brad Stevens had a great first season as the general manager. He went out and he got good, like he got Al Horford, who everybody loves, good vibes. And he tried some things cheap, and then when it didn't work, he got rid of the things that didn't work, and he basically got in some like. And Derek White, I'm a little bit missed on Derek White has a tendency still to do some dumb shit, and I think part of that it's because he needs a training camp, so he'll do these like things where like drives to the hoops and takes these shots that obviously are going to block, and you're like, he's still not. Is a basketball IQ is still not where I want it, but I do think like the guys in the system for the Celtics get smarter as they go along.
Yep.
So like I do think I still like Derek White. I still think he's a piece that I want to have around, and at worst we move out next year. But like I do think that like it was a really good. He's not a negative player. Like Derek White,
he's a good player. I liked him in the sport.
He is, but like if you watch him, he'll do these things where like he does these drives to the basket where you're like, what are you doing shooting that? But you know that's gonna get like he'll put this up in front of the rim protector, and you're like, and he also doesn't. He also is expecting to get like the foul call like he was the primary point guard like he did for the Spurs. Slightly different game here because he's very definitely not the primary.
Yep.
Other than that, I mean, like again, I think I think the more interesting series to me for the second round. I mean, this interesting series I think are Boston, Milwaukee, and Phoenix, Dallas.
Yeah,
right? I think, particularly since I do know that, like I think Dallas can get like there's a world. It's not that hard for me to see Luka just going crazy and taking this team to the finals, right? That's
right.
It's going to happen one year. I don't know if this is the year, but like it's going to happen where he just goes to the finals and loses. I mean, again, I don't think if Dallas gets to the finals, I don't think Dallas is winning, right? Because I do think that once you get there, whatever team you're facing, whether it be Miami or Boston, which would probably, or Milwaukee, maybe. I think Milwaukee's banged up, but like whatever team you'd be facing in that finals has enough personnel that you can't beat.
Right.
But again, it's interesting. All these teams are good and fun, and hopefully the second round will be as fun as the first.
I hope so as well. And Arturo, it was awesome having you on again. Welcome back, and welcome back to everyone who's listening for the first time in what feels like a year. We'll do another one for the next round. Another episode for the next round. If you like this podcast, please remember to go to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review. If you're not subscribed, please make sure that you subscribe to this podcast. We're available on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much everywhere else you can think of. Arturo, thanks again, my friend.
Perfect. Thanks, man.